All right, we're gonna get started here. Welcome to Board Leadership Calgary 2022. My name is Justin Solomilo. I'm from the Alberta Community Development. I'm going to be presenting today with my colleague Phil Chung, who you'll meet in a couple minutes here, and want to acknowledge Leslie Evans, who's also here from the Federation of Calgary Communities, who is part of the Board Leadership Calgary Planning Committee as well. Thank you for joining us online. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories in Alberta of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Today, I'm joining you from Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Nisga'a, Nakota, and Tsuut'ina nations. We also acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Now, Board Leadership Calgary, if this is your third time of this year, you're going to hear the spiel again. We are a learning collaborative that was formed in 2013, really to organize affordable and accessible learning opportunities for board members and staff of smaller nonprofits. So we're excited that you've joined us this year. And if you've been to our past events, you know that since 2020, we've done things a little bit differently and offered these great webinars online. And this is the third of three. And so hopefully you got a chance to be a part of our last two. If not, we're going to give you all the info for the YouTube channel and all that. Really, staff and volunteers from a variety of organizations work together to plan this event, including Alberta Culture, the Federation of Calgary Communities, as well as other nonprofit community leaders. A special thank you to our sponsors that support our efforts to keep the learning event affordable, Service Credit Union and Simple Cloudworks. And thank you to the Friends of Federation of Calgary Communities as our fiscal supporter. Just a little bit of online housekeeping. At this point, most folks are comfortable with this online space. So hopefully you are hearing me right now. If not, you can message Phil or I in the chat. But at the end of it, check your settings, make sure those settings are okay, that you can hear us and the proper output. This happens to us before we logged on. Phil even was like, I can't hear you, couldn't hear me, because he had some setting issues. We also have closed captioning. Hopefully you can see that at the bottom of your screen if you need it. If you have any questions or comments, we will be using the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just remember that it is a public chat box, so provide your thoughts and comments with that in mind. We'll also be recording the session, and it'll be available soon after the presentation, and this will be on the Board Leadership Calgary YouTube channel. You will get information on this, and there will also be an evaluation at the end of the session. Please take your time to fill it out. If you don't get a chance to today, you will get an email with the link as well. All right. So before we move into the formal presentation, just a little bit about the unit that Phil and I work with through Alberta Culture. Really, we want to improve, enhance, and otherwise contribute to positive ways in the lives of Albertans. The Community Development Unit itself offers facilitation, public engagement, community collaboration, as well as learning and development service to nonprofit organizations, staff, and volunteers, and really the sector as a whole. Some of the services that we provide: strategic planning. You're here today to learn some of that. Board governance, roles and responsibilities. Fund development, grant writing, basically things to support the capacity of your nonprofit organization, you as an individual, as well as the sector. Phil and I specifically work in the learning and development side, where we really create, support, and educate individual Albertans' capacity to work effectively at both the organizational and civic engagement levels. So much of our work, like today, is providing offerings to help people engage with the nonprofit sector with tools they need to succeed. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Phil to kind of set up our conversations and for the day. And so Phil, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Hi, everybody. So my name is Phil Chung, like Justin said, and today our presentation is really going to be about strategic planning, but first strategic thinking, then strategic planning. We wanted to start off, however, with getting a sense from folks in the room where everybody is at in regards to their strategic planning experience. So I'm going to ask Justin to bring up a poll very shortly, and we're going to ask you to select what best reflects your experience with strategic planning. And before we set up the poll, I just want to remind everybody that these polls are anonymous, so feel free to be honest with your own assessment in these questions. So Justin, if you will bring up the poll for us, please. Hey, great, thank you. So there are two questions here. You may have to scroll down just to see all the answers, but for those that may not be seeing the polls, I'll read them out to you. The first question asks, how much experience do you have with strategic planning for your organization? And your options are that you have no experience, that you have participated in a strategic planning exercise before, perhaps you've led a strategic planning exercise once, or the very last selection there is you have experience both supporting and leading strategic planning exercises. And then the second question is, in your current situation, that is, whether you're a board member, you're a volunteer, you're a staff member, do you use your strategic plan as a tool for decision making? And then your options are yes, you use it often, yes, you use it sometimes, perhaps you have a strategic plan, but you don't necessarily use it, or you may not have a strategic plan at all. And then the very last selection is you don't know if you have a strategic plan. So I'll give everybody a couple more, let's say seconds here to take a look at these answers and see where everybody's at. We're going to try and hit a threshold of maybe 80% people selecting their answers before we take a look. Oh, great. Thank you, Justin. So let's just take a quick look at these questions. So I'm glad to see that most people in this session today have participated in a strategic planning exercise with their organization or led or have quite a bit of experience. For those that have no experience, I'm glad to have you here with us today. Welcome. We're hoping that you're going to get a lot out of this presentation. We have a lot of information for you. And in the second question there, do you use your strategic plan as a tool? And again, I'm really happy to see that you either do have a strategic plan or that you the most people will use it often or use it sometimes. And now for those of you that may have no experience with strategic planning, or you don't know if you have a strategic plan or your organization doesn't have one, these questions aren't meant to be, something for you to look back at and think, oh man, I can't believe our organization doesn't have this. This is more just a reflective exercise for you to take a look at your organization and maybe bring this up as a question for your board members and your your organization. Thank you so much, Justin. So it looks like we have varying experiences with strategic planning within this audience today. And this webinar has elements that will hopefully satisfy the most basic needs for how to think strategically and do a basic strategic plan, as well as something for those who may be looking for some advanced considerations around strategic thinking. We'll be looking to discuss not only what a strategic plan is, but why it is important for an organization to have to move forward. We're going to briefly touch upon the components of a strategic plan. And we also want to impart this idea of strategic thinking. We often hear about the strategic plan itself, but we rarely talk about how we can also think strategically through that plan. We'll also take a look at environmental scanning, and that's the process of looking at the factors that affect your organization, not only internally, but externally as well. And finally, we'll look at some effective strategies to support how your plan can be a living and guiding document for your organization. And we want to reiterate that this is a basic level of understanding around strategic planning. We hope you're going to learn the importance of strategic thinking and what it means to really be truly strategic in your organization. You'll learn about strategic planning, its benefits for your nonprofit organization or perhaps prospective organization, and how best to use it to support strategic thinking. We also want you to take away some resources that include information, steps, and tips to make strategic thinking and the planning process easier in your organization. And we're first going to take a look at what strategic planning is, because we know that there are several nuances to the definition of strategic planning. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to use these ones to frame our discussions. First, strategic planning is the process of building a plan that includes good strategy, and it turns goals and strategies into formal documented steps that can be implemented. In other words, the plan is the final product of the process, and Justin will touch upon that later, where it outlines some awareness and actions to meet the goals of the plan. And a good plan can support the board, staff, and volunteers to see and understand where the organization is going and why it's going in that direction. Planning for the future of the organization is important so that everyone involved is headed in the same direction and has a clear path of how to get where they want to go. As an organization, you're going to be asking yourselves, what do we want to accomplish and how are we going to get there? And a strategic planning process is going to be unique to the organization it's intended for. Every organization is going to have their own process for achieving their own goals and their objectives. Your strategic plan will be a living document to guide the operations of the organization. And this really recognizes that things change, whether it's in funding, in personnel, priorities, and many more. Things change for organizations, and so too can your strategic plan. I also want to clarify that organizations may have different plans going on concurrently at the same time. You're going to have your business plan going on, operations plan, communications plan, etc. We're going to focus specifically on your strategic plan, which is really the ultimate organizational planning document. So why should we plan? You may be thinking, our organization is doing fine anyway, so why do we need to plan? I'm going to use the chat box in this next activity to ask you to answer this question. Why do you feel it's important for an organization to formally plan or to have a plan in place? Actually, two questions. And then the second question is, what are the implications of not having a plan? I'll give everybody a couple of moments just to type their thoughts into the chat box. And then we'll take a look at these afterwards. And I do want to mention, yes, you are going to be getting these slides after. So a couple of days after, maybe let's say Tuesday or Wednesday next week, we're going to have the video recording uploaded and we'll send out an email along with the slides for this presentation, as well as any resources that we have. Thank you for that question. So I'm getting some answers here. So we have sustainability of the organization. Absolutely. You want to plan out how you can sustain the organization. You want to plan so you can achieve your goals to make informed decisions. Our poll question earlier asked, do you use your strategic plan in decision making? So I'm happy to see that there. To keep your focus aligned with your vision and mission, absolutely. If you need direction in an organization, if you have no plan, it's going to be helter-skelter, no administration, and likely not achieving any goals. Thank you everybody for your answers. I'm getting a lot here. I'm getting some other ones. Having a plan is a guide for your deliverables. It makes deciding on projects and services much easier, and this uses less time in making those decisions. Absolutely. Great answers, everybody. I'm so sorry I can't read them all. There are so many coming in, but thank you so much for your participation in this particular question today on why you should plan. So I want to add your thoughts to this particular quote from JFK. This is it, and the quote says, it's still about the comfort of opinion versus the discomfort of thought. And planning together as board members is all about this. A good planning session is about moving people from their own opinion to collective thought or common directions. And opinions are relatively easy to obtain, but moving forward with common thought is much harder to achieve. As well, collective thought can be uncomfortable. You have to really pull back the layers in your own thinking to explore your own core thought process as to why you might think about something in a certain way. And that process itself, in and of itself, can be a little bit uncomfortable for people. We all bring our personal opinions, our perspectives and passions to our organization. And the plan and the process of developing that plan provides a forum or a place where we share those opinions, those perspectives and passions, but most importantly, moves it forward with a clear group shared direction, a roadmap, a path in the road that will be taken. And some groups feel that they talk a lot, but never seem to get anywhere. And at the end of the day, you need to share those opinions, those perspectives and passions, and most importantly, move them forward to develop that shared direction to get the big picture of your organization. And we say the process of developing your strategic plan is a great tool for doing that. Now, we want to acknowledge there may be some challenging and difficult decisions in creating that shared direction, but the effort is going to be well worth it in the long run. A plan is all about getting your ducks in a row as well. And if you're going in many aimless directions within your organization or are even perceived to be by your volunteers, your staff, your stakeholders, perhaps, then you have a recipe for many struggles ahead. Some organizations often get stuck in the middle. They fail to move their own opinions to collective thought, and a well thought out strategic thinking and strategic planning process is going to help you accomplish that. So there are many benefits to strategic planning. Certainly what you see here is not all of them. First of all, it helps set the direction of your organization is headed towards. We've indicated here that the planning process lays out the direction your organization is headed towards. We've indicated here that the planning process lays out the roadmap on how your organization is going to achieve its vision and shows its purpose over the next few years or however long your strategic plan may be for. Strategic planning will also allow everyone to put in their thoughts about the big picture for the organization, something that I mentioned earlier. And as well, it helps to know what to measure. If you set some goals that will lead you to your desired outcomes and provide some indicators to tell you when you've achieved those goals, it's much easier to measure those results. A good plan is essential in an environment that has times of rapid turnover and helps provide a sense of direction and continuity even when personnel changes. The work of the organization continues, the goals are still being worked towards because everyone knows the path the organization is on. And related to this idea of change is that planning provides a framework for adaptation. It can allow for decentralized decision-making that enables people within your organization to respond quickly to change. They don't have to go to their senior leaders or to a manager or a supervisor to ask what they need to do. They already know what they need to do. I also want to talk about team dynamics at this point as well. The first point that we have here is that strategic plans serve as a great orientation tool for new members as it helps them quickly understand the purpose of the organization, its vision, and the goals and outcomes it hopes to achieve over the next few years. Planning has also been shown to improve cooperation and teamwork, reduce conflict and insecurity within an organization, and create a more unified workplace. And this can also extend to increase collaboration with other organizations. A well-written plan will also have each member see themselves as having a role in helping the organization move forward, because this helps increase board members' commitment to the organization and its goals. It also gives board members a sense of purpose and belonging within their own organization. The last thing I want to mention here is that in many organizations, it can be challenging to dedicate time at regular meetings to have strategic conversations. Often there is a fixation on having regular reports like committee reports, correspondence, or other issues that may emerge between meetings. Dedicating the time to the creation of a strategic plan provides a forum for board members to have these strategic conversations and share their perspectives about the organization, its purpose, and its future. So we have all these great reasons why an organization ought to plan, but motivating your board members to plan is something else entirely. So we're probably speaking to the converted. You see the value of strategic planning, but what about those people that don't? And we recognize that this could include some board members themselves. How do we get their support to plan? First, you might talk about public trust. We know that people in the community have a perception of your organization. And if your organization shows that you have a plan with good logic and reasoning, it can help build trust into what you can do in and for the community you are serving. Perhaps you can talk about securing the future. A key role of the board member is to ensure the sustainable future for the organization. And I saw some of that in the chat box activity earlier. This really involves securing your organization's place in the community, securing its financial assets, and keeping its purpose and goals relevant. Perhaps you can maybe speak to the board member's ego a little bit and tell them that they can influence the direction of the organization. Did you know that an Albertan volunteers an average of 2 years in any one organization? So the board needs to think in terms of what they can do together that will leave a legacy and will make a difference in the organization in that short amount of time. And your plan, as we said before, is the roadmap to do it. We talk about continuity as well. I spoke earlier about how the environment is constantly changing. Turnover is more common than we'd like to see. And the way people access programs and services is also changing. Think about how a couple of years ago, how having online offerings was not the norm, but is now the norm in many places. A strategic plan provides a stabilizing force in that changing environment. People within an organization will change, but the strategic plan helps give direction to move forward. I've mentioned it also provides opportunities for team building because the whole process of planning is an opportunity for the organization to get to know each other. I also want to stress that it is a great tool for board orientation. It really is the best board orientation tool you have. And finally, it reduces time spent at meetings, really valuable time that you have in those meetings because you might be meeting only a couple of times every year. Without a clear picture, board members can fall prey to meeting time spent on going down really directionless paths. A solid plan will help guide decisions of an organization for when a board member asks, how does this conversation align with our plans, or when discussions get sidetracked? In this next section, we'll take a look at some basic components of a strategic plan. And I want to note that this presentation is originally a 3-hour presentation, but we had to condense it down to an hour and a half. So we're going to move through this next section a little bit more quickly than we originally would. So here are the basic components of a strategic plan, and I'm not going to dive into detail about them right now, as Justin is going to be discussing these components later on in relation to strategic thinking, but I'll offer some brief descriptions of them instead. So you may be aware of different terminology, but essentially a strategic plan is going to contain these things. First, you're going to have your foundational statements, which lay the groundwork for the work of your organization. The vision is going to provide a snapshot of your ideal future. It's really a compelling description of what your organization is striving for. Your mission is going to tell another person what your organization does, who you do it for, and how you go about doing it. Your organization may also have value statements that help shape your organizational culture. And we like to think that for value statements to be of value to you, they really ought to be defined in the context of what your organization does. And what I mean by that is, if someone were to ask you what one of your values means to you, could you do it? You also have goals, which are outcome-based statements that describe what results the organization wants to accomplish in order to move closer to its vision. And these goals help identify the key areas that your organization is going to focus its resources, its energy, efforts, and time. You also have strategies that explain the how your organization plans to achieve those goals and objectives. And it's going to set into motion actions or activities that will be laid out in the action plan. So the action plan lays out what activities or tasks will be undertaken for each goal, who will be responsible or accountable, when activities will occur, and what resources will be needed. Our speaker from Board Leadership Calgary last week, Gail, mentioned a great acronym, WWDWBW, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but it stands for who will do what by when. And that's a really great way to summarize what's really needed in an action plan. And finally, having a plan to evaluate your performance is an important part of your strategic plan, but it is often overlooked. Having measures in place, determining what success looks like for your organization, and monitoring your progress helps ensure your plan is an active one. Before I hand it over to Justin to talk about strategic thinking and how to incorporate that into your strategic plan, I want to touch upon who does what in strategic planning. And of course, I want to start with a question that I want to ask you. What do you think your role is in shaping your organization's strategic plan? I've offered a few of our thoughts previously, but I'm curious what your thoughts were. And your answer to this could be from your role as a board member, as a staff member, or as a volunteer, or even as a service user or a member of your organization. So please let us know your thoughts. What do you think your role is in shaping your organization's strategic plan? And I'm going to do my best to keep up with the chat box this time around as well. So we look forward to reading your thoughts here. Right. Thank you so much for starting us off, Stacy. So facilitate the creation and implementation of the plan to get engagement with board members. I'm seeing financial output as well. Somebody has indicated that they are an executive in their organization and their role is to help lead discussions on the strategic plan, right? You know, Darlene has said depends on your role within the organization, absolutely as well. Pitch the benefits of having a strategic plan, absolutely. That's probably the first step that you're going to have. Sharing the needs and requirements of clients to lead discussions. Suzanne, thank you for adding this. Actively participate in the planning discussion. Absolutely. So you want to actively participate. You want to share your thoughts. You want to see yourself in that strategic plan. Contribute a realistic idea of what our capacities are and what our future might be. Absolutely. So you want to take a look at what's going on around you right now, or internally to your organization and externally, and look to what your future might be. Take a look at, or take a guess, a well-informed guess about what your future might look like. Be a change maker, absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody, for these answers here. I think I did my best, or I did a good job at keeping up with everybody. And I apologize if I wasn't able to read your answer out loud, but those are great examples of, your role in shaping your organization's strategic plan. Here is a way to look at strategic plans in terms of an organization's operations. So the board is at the highest level of operations in terms of understanding the legislation your organization is influenced by, as well as setting the higher level vision and purpose of the organization. Now, this doesn't mean that the staff or volunteers don't have a say in these things, however. Where the board and staff meet is the strategies piece, that fourth piece down there, where there's often some work together on how an organization can achieve its goals. The staff is going to be the group that implements the tangible actions that are decided in the strategy. And often they're going to provide a sort of boots on the ground perspective on a strategy and whether or not it's realistic and implementable. Now, we understand that not all organizations have staff, and this may just be a case where the board and volunteers need to work together to implement the strategic plan. It's important to make the distinction between the highest level decision-making and how the day-to-day operations look like, however. Again, does this mean that the board can't support the day-to-day operations, or that staff and volunteers can't support the visioning or the creation of the mission? Absolutely not. There are conversations to be had in all of these areas. It's just important to know who is ultimately accountable to what at each level. More often than not, though, the board will identify the goals and strategies for the organization, and the staff is going to implement those goals and strategies set out by the board. So in summary, there is a relationship with all parties involved at all levels of the planning process. And as you can see on this slide, the board and staff have some involvement in every area when planning and crafting the strategic plan. Now, I want to recognize there is a lot of information on this slide, and I summarized it very quickly. So I will note that this presentation is going to be sent out to all registrants in a couple of days when we have the video recording uploaded. I did want to get a question here. When and how do you involve the community? So a very simple way to involve the community in the strategic planning process is to do perhaps an informal survey or even a formal survey of your service users or your community. Ask them what they like to see, ask them what you have been doing well, what perhaps if you're willing to take on this feedback, what you may improve upon as well. That's one way that you can help inform how you can involve the community without actually having them, fully be in the planning process, but you still get their ideas, their thoughts, and their feelings and their views. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin, who will lead the next part about strategic thinking.
Thanks, Phil. And yeah, that's a great question. We're gonna share an example here as well in a couple of slides of how we can engage the community as well. Pardon me. So this next section, as Phil mentioned off the top, this next section is really going to look into, injecting that strategy piece in your strategic plan. So we hope that you'll get a new appreciation for what it means to be truly strategic in your planning, as well as building, this strategic thinking component in that planning process. And so, these are two concepts that we're going to talk about. I mean, it was the title of the session, what's the difference between strategic thinking and strategic planning, and if there is a difference at all. So as Phil mentioned in the previous section, he talked about what a strategic plan was, but as we said, we didn't really go into where's the strategy piece in this plan specifically. And strategic planning itself is the process of documenting a plan to implement and monitor an agreed upon strategy. And some may say that it could just be semantics, but there are many indications that really this traditional view of strategic planning, which most likely is Google how to do strategic planning and fill out boxes, is maybe not serving very well many organizations, especially in the current and changing environment. We know things change rather quickly. I mean, we could just look back at the past 2 years and see how quickly things have changed. And if the focus is only on a specific documented plan, then you potentially could be left behind not being able to adjust and change when things in your environment are moving. So strategic thinking takes place continually in your organization, and it's not just during the period of the plan documentation. It's really needed to keep up with the rapid change of environment. So we're going to go a little bit further here in the next few slides. Now, strategic thinking alone is a cognitive process of considering something with awareness and intention. And as it relates to planning, here's one of the definitions from the literature. Strategic thinking is a way in which people in an organization think about, assess, view, and create the future it is creating tomorrow. So like this definition, most definitions of strategic thinking focus on really individuals thinking about the future. And in this case, it is actually not reactive, but it's being more proactive. And it's more than responding to just the day-to-day or the long-term problems, opportunities, and new realities. Really, it's about creating tomorrow and the future your organization hopes to see. Pardon me. Thinking about the future really doesn't discount the past and the present, but it does require you to move beyond what may be seen as the status quo. So solely making decisions on what, hey, we've always done it this way, can be extremely limiting. Now, we know some folks have, sent us some questions at the registration here, and some of you commented actually specifically on how do we move beyond the status quo? Or perhaps you have board members in an organization that have been there since the very beginning, and hey, we've done things this way, we always want to keep it this way, even though it might not be reflective of what's currently happening. And so hopefully we can provide some direction in having those conversations around more strategic thinking as it brings you closer to your vision as an organization. So organizations that expand their thinking in what could be, or even create a new future or imagine it differently than what it is now, often lead the way for other organizations to bring changes and innovation in the sector. And we'll talk about a really tangible example in a couple of slides here. But something that maybe everyone can be familiar with, let's take the telephone as an example. And for those of us of a certain vintage, you'll probably know and appreciate this. But for the longest time, the telephone was simply a rotary dial in your home. It was usually clunky. If you need to see what that looks like, maybe Google an image of what a rotary telephone looks like. It really didn't change much for maybe the color. Maybe it moved from a table and then you hung it up on a wall. And maybe it from a rotary, it maybe turned into push buttons. There might have been some changes in design, but they were relatively small. And how we used it was really the same for same number of years. And then all of a sudden, the environment changed around us. In the early 90s, personal computers started popping up in homes. Processing speeds started to increase with them. Bandwidth issues started to be solved. I mean, people all of a sudden knew what bandwidth was. Cell towers emerged, fiber optics played a role in connection. And so there's definitely some strategic thinking that went into place that could take advantage of some of the changes in the environment and really turn that traditional telephone upside down, turn it into something that we've never seen before, really a new way for communication. So the phone became mobile, right? Some folks had them in their car. We didn't have it in their car, but we knew some people who had it in their car. Many of us have it in our hands nowadays. Everywhere we go, we can expand its use. It's not just talking now, we're texting, we can play games, we can navigate the world through the internet, we can check out the latest sales online. For those who did Black Friday last week, many of you were just on your phone, picking up those deals. You can check the weather, the stocks, find information, even video call people. Now, we know this is a result of strategic thinkers in perhaps small companies that turned into tech giants. Because you look at everyday things that have changed in other ways within our lifetime, vehicles, the way we experience food, tons of things. Now, a key part of their thinking was not just accepting things that things will always be the same. So like, planning around a status quo. Folks imagine things completely different. There was some environmental scanning and look for completely new options, develop prototypes, and ask how can we incorporate new technologies and advances to completely offer something beneficial to those that we serve like we've never seen before. Now, I know this example, is definitely, tend to be in the for-profit space. But this is not to exclude the nonprofit environment, because we see these sorts of ideas as well. Personally, I mean, I think about the arts community and how during the pandemic, there's really been a change of ways people can consume art. Virtually on demand are now the possibilities. Fundraisers that go beyond your local community with the introduction of crowdfunding, virtual fundraising platforms, and so the list goes on. And we truly believe that the nonprofit environment is changing fast as well. Pardon me, and needs to be thinking strategically just as much as the for-profit sector. So look at the current trends that we're seeing that are indicators that things need to change beyond the status quo. There's definitely been a reduction of grants, both from government, private levels. There's been a change even in what volunteering looks like. Even by definition, volunteering may be different generation to generation. Changes in your community, maybe from the infrastructure to the composition, and even changes in government. Now, though you might not think that these things maybe directly affect your organization, with a little thought, you can actually see how some of these trends create a ripple effect in ways that may not be so obvious. So let's take a moment to just further reflect on these two concepts and how they differ. Now, strategic thinking is about synthesis. It's generally intuitive. It attempts to really to go beyond what's logical thinking that can inform. Because information about potential future is always incomplete. We never know what's going to happen. The thinking required for success in this activity needs really to be forward thinking, open-minded, potentially experimental. And strategic thinking is concerned with exploration, usually based on limited and patchy information and options. So, pardon me, not the steps needed for implementation of actions, which is really the realm of strategic planning. So strategic thinking needs a particular mindset and capacity to move beyond kind of conventional thinking. It needs open minds, and you have to be comfortable with working with ambiguity. And you have to be willing to be challenged about how you think your organization operates and be open to listening to diverse and potentially conflicting perspectives. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to take on a conflicting perspective. It just means you have to be open to listening to them. And as we said a few moments ago, strategic thinking is about being proactive instead of reactive. Now, the strategic planning side is about analysis, breaking down of a goal into steps, designing how steps may be implemented, estimating the anticipated consequences of each step, and measuring the manner by which progress is being made, which are documented in a plan. And so the plan, so this is a plan, programmed activity requiring thinking, which is strongly analytical and logical in order to ensure that things stay on track. Now, we're just comparing these two processes and not saying, hey, this one's bad, this one's good. We're just saying that, we can make one piece stronger by, adding a different approach. We're just laying out the concepts for you today. So a process in strategic thinking really is about exploring options, and strategic planning is about implementing actions. So you can see that the process needs to work together in order for it to be successful. Excuse me. Now, we're going to introduce this concept here by Marie Conway, and it's called the Future Thinking Model. And Marie Conway is an Australian researcher. She's a founder and writer of Foresight in the Present, a lot of this future thinking stuff. And we need to recognize that, strategic planning is actually the last step in strategy development and implementation process. So, pardon me, when we talk about planning, we're not talking about deciding how to position the organization in the future. We're really talking about how to take action today. So by focusing on the end product, the plan, we really risk ignoring and spending time on the missing element, the way you think through the plan, strategic thinking, which is really the capacity of organization to systematically develop and maintain a shared view of the future that really can inform decision-making today. So in this model, Conway's model, strategic planning is just one of 4 interdependent and overlapping steps in the development and implementation of strategy. While it may be simple to only use terminology of strategic planning, it really blurs the boundaries between the other steps, differentiating among it, because each step is distinct in its focus, and each step needs different methods and approaches to move forward. So I'll give you a quick overview of these steps, and then we'll look at it in a more practical sense to see how you can implement it for your organization. And yeah, the author of this is Marie Conway there. So, she has a website. A lot of this information that will take longer than 90 minutes can be covered there if you're interested. Okay, the first step is called strategic scanning. And we're going to use this term interchangeably with environmental scanning. So if you've heard that terminology, it really means the same thing. It's a step all about examining some internal factors in your organization and external factors in the environment. So for anything that may have impact in your organization and its ability to reach the goals. Now, in this step, you want to have careful consideration of the future in addition to what has happened now, as well as the past, and you want to examine a widespread number of factors. So from this stage, you will have collected a comprehensive set of information that will be really critical in informing the rest of the steps. So it leads us to our second step, which is that strategic thinking piece. And this is a stage where you take information from that strategic scanning and generate some options for your organization. So in this stage, organizations are encouraged to be creative, explore diverse options, and dream big and audaciously, as many great strategies sometimes come from that dreaming stage. And so it leads us to a strategic decision-making stage. And again, we're going to go through each of these steps slowly. I'm just giving you a high-level overview here. So in this stage, board members and leaders evaluate those strategic options and determine which ones are the most appropriate for the organization to pursue. Really, this stage involves informed decisions about which options they should pursue and which actions the organization will take to accomplish its goals. So better informed decisions help deal with the uncertainty of the future. And so the ultimate outcome of strategic thinking is really better decisions today. And then strategic planning, the final stage in this model, takes those decisions and translates them into actions in a documented format. Something many of you in the polls earlier, you may have a strategic plan. It may be a piece of paper, digital, and something. This is the final product amongst all these three things. So now that we have this general overview, we're going to walk through each step to better understand each component, and we'll provide you with some practical resources to engage in each steps in your organization. Now, to help us understand this concept better, I'm going to share with you an example of incorporating strategic thinking before that actual strategic plan. So with permission, we were able to share this example from the organization Viking Beaver Family and Community Support Services, or you may know it as an FCSS. So in Alberta specifically, pardon me, FCSSs are organizations that partner with the province to deliver locally driven, preventative social initiatives that enhance the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. So some examples of local FCSS programming are providing information and supporting access to available social supports in the community, supporting and encouraging volunteer work in the community, or helping individuals develop skills or families develop skills for greater resilience. Think about like mentoring programs. So programs and services can be targeted to individuals of any family, of any age, to families, to the entire communities. Basically, really develop organization to meet the needs of a specific community. So if you have an FCSS in your community, it may look different from another community and so on. So through support of our unit here, we helped guide this conversation through this strategic thinking, this future thinking model to support their strategic planning efforts. Now, we started with an exercise around strategic scanning or environmental scanning, as we said, and really this involved taking a look at this organization's vision, mission, and values, and made sure that they understood the purpose of the organization. Now, this helps the organization answer the question, what can we see today? Now, in addition to looking at the internal mandate, leaders in this FCSS also looked at the provincial mandate of the FCSS and what are some of the expectations that the province has as a partner to the organization. So being an organization that's reflective of local needs, the leadership also talked to the local town council and understood areas that they were working on as elected leaders in the community to explore mutual priorities and potential opportunities to work together. The group also engaged in a process called a historical scan, And this looked at key points of the past, present, and future. And this is just an exercise around looking at what is the story of our organization. This is another thing you can Google historical scan as a piece around, one of the tools you can use for strategic scan. But this particular group looked at that to look at what was the story of Viking Beaver FCSS. Now, this didn't happen in one day. This wasn't a sit down, answer all these questions. There was a plan to gather materials, have conversations with various stakeholders. As I mentioned, there was, talking to town council and things like that, and understand how the organization is perceived in the community. And, to that point of that person who Phil mentioned around like, well, like, how do we engage the community? Sometimes it can be a survey. Sometimes it's actually, setting time to, hey, we see you here all the time. Can I have like 10 minutes of your time just to talk about our organization? And this step is all about seeking information. And so in the strategic thinking piece, that second stage, the step asks the question, what might happen in the future? So in the first step, the Viking Beaver FCSS did a lot of connecting with stakeholders. Again, they included their town council to look for potential alignment and priorities and work in the community. And with all this work done in that strategic scanning stage, the organization was able to better frame their mandate. And it made it clear what they wanted to achieve for the organization and the community. So the organization brainstormed all these possible options to strategically position themselves in terms of the programs and services that they wanted to provide and build community capacity within their mandate over a period of time. And in particular, they looked at like a 3, a 5, and a 10-year time period. So this included naming a strategic position or an option. And you can see, they came up with 5 options here, developing a description for each option, and then looking at the pros and cons with each position and option. And so they were able to categorize each of these options into a few main areas, some of which here are highlighted, and we're going to talk about that option 2 there. What would be the status quo, what would be a family focus, and what would be supporting seniors. So that scanning stage, they had tons of info going on, and they were able to have a conversation around, okay, what is this info actually saying? Can we categorize all this info? And these were kind of the 5 options that came out there. So it was about option generation, as many of them as they had, while being reflective of that scanning work that I just mentioned there. Now, the third step in that strategic thinking model is that decision-making piece. And really this step asks the question, where will we go in the future? So as the group moved into this step, they agreed to create some decision-making questions that would help filter what they would commit to, and conversely, things that they wouldn't commit to. Pardon me. So some of the questions I want to highlight here is like, what options would be the easiest or hardest to implement? What's the option that would provide us with the least or most short or long-term gains? What would be something that would be supported by our members? Least and most. What's something that we feel most comfortable with or least comfortable with? And, out of all these options, which is something that we all agree is not a position we want to take over the next few years? So, your decision questions don't have to be this exactly. This is just a guideline of what they use as kind of their criteria here. And so, given all these questions, a bit of healthy debate, the organization chose the option focusing on families in the next few years. And I'll go back here. This is where it's in the box there. This is the option that they chose, given the framework of their questioning. This is where they felt their focus should be. Now, these 3 steps took about a full day to do, in addition to, I mentioned, just that scanning work ahead of time with talking to folks and surveying and all those things. So actually, after a few weeks of reflection and internal discussion, the leadership reconvened to work on the last step of the strategic thinking, future thinking model. And that's actually the strategic planning step. And this step asks, what will we do today? So you see that strategic planning only starts when some of that thinking work was done ahead of time. So with Viking Beaver FCSS, their strategic planning day built a plan that was family focused, and the option, was the option that they identified as the strategic decision-making step. Now, in choosing this focus, it also meant that they had to let go of some of the work that they always did. But you know what ended up happening? The community itself ended up supporting some of that work. So, for example, they had a program that involved shoveling seniors' walkways during the winter. Now, this program that the Viking Beaver FCSS identified, it kind of fell out their family-focused mandate. But this program actually became an opportunity for another organization in town to pick up because it aligned closer with their mandates. Was this like a difficult process? Was there tension on the board and challenges? Definitely. But by being clear about what the organization wanted to focus on, it actually opened the door for another organization in town to provide a service that fits closer to their mandate. So if we're looking at like a traditional planning, like you might just start with the question, wait, what do we want to do in the next 3 to 5 years? Now we can get feedback from everything. And if I ask, even if I asked you this question, maybe you're sitting with your board member, you might have 2, 3 different things. Now, this, it might be helpful, it might be productive, but if you don't have a focus to what that question is really asking, you might be challenged with, again, a lot of different pieces, a lot of things. So it's important to understand that scanning piece and identifying really what's happening around you and understanding how your organization is perceived to the greater community you're part of, by identifying a focus area that you can position your resources to what you can do at this time. So really putting the strategic back into your strategic plan, I'm just going to share with you a typical model, and we're going to look at how actually we can make this process truly strategic. So we're going to incorporate this model, this future thinking model, into like each one of these steps, because maybe if you've been part of a strategic planning, you've seen, oh yeah, this is what we do first. Environmental scan, we talk about foundation goals. So how can we make those steps a little bit more focused, and how can we make those steps a little bit more beneficial and add a value to what you may already be doing? So we talked a lot about the environmental scan piece or strategic scan piece. Really, this is an art of systematically exploring your organization's internal environment and external environment. Really, this is to help better understand the nature and pace of change in your organization and its surrounding environment, and identify potential opportunities, challenges, risks, and likely future developments relevant to your organization, as well as prepare your organization and its leaders to proactively, instead of reactively, respond to opportunities, challenges, and risks of future events. So, the scan really explores potentially new ideas, strange ideas, weird ideas, like, as well as just like the persistent challenges and trends faced today. Now, it focuses on factors spanning across time, like you may look at past successes and failures, present circumstances, future trends and issues. So a well-developed environmental scan is critical to a successful strategic planning process. And we are going to go through a quick exercise around what potentially that could look like. So again, it doesn't mean necessarily dwelling on the past, but really acknowledging it for where an organization is today. And so in your scan, you'll be looking for information really that relates to your sector, community, perhaps that you serve. And so not necessarily about what's happening on the day-to-day, but what you need to consider before you define future strategy and write your plan. So while you're looking at information, you might want to look what's happening in your industry, your field, looking at your services, how they'll evolve. Maybe again, looking at the folks that are accessing your services. How have they changed? How have the demographics changed, their access? What are trends that you're seeing? What are emerging shifts that we think is the status quo, and so on? And so what we're really trying to say in this approach is have an open mind in the scanning process, because really the space is about possibilities. It's about what might happen in the future as a result of the evolution of trends you've identified, not just what is here and present today. So really, again, this step is not about decision making. This is just about looking at what's currently happening. And naturally, you might want to you might naturally do this, look for things that confirm what you believe, instead of encourage you to look at trends that might be outside perspective. This space is good to be open about new possibilities of your organization that may be previously unseen or ignored. So before we jump into an exercise here, just on specific tips around your scanning, really the scan will increase your ability to be more strategic, as you look kind of wider from where your organization is. Really researching helps overcome some of those knowledge gaps, biases, assumptions, preconceptions, or misunderstanding. And some organizations may task a team to do this, a group to do this, maybe individually at first. And you want to be able to use credible sources in your scanning, get diverse perspectives, including talking to people who use your programs and service, as well as evaluating your strategic plan against some of these environmental factors that may affect it. You want to reflect and think about how these trends, again, affect you, how it will challenge your potential relevancy of the future, because oftentimes that may be a goal for your organization. How do we remain relevant? Now, you may have, in terms of tools itself, I mentioned a historical scan. Maybe some of you have done a SWOT process. This is a strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats to an organization as an analysis of internal and external factors. We're going to shortly look at a STEEP analysis as just a bit of an exercise around scanning. So there are many tools out there. I know I've just mentioned a few, but if there's something of interest to you, maybe you've seen out there, you say, hey, I've seen this wave analysis. What is that? Feel free to send us an email and we can help talk you through it. Because just like everything, in terms of tools, you want to choose the right tool that will support your organization. Okay, I'm going to take a vocal break here by jumping into, some work for you folks here. So I mentioned a STEEP analysis, and it's one of the tools you can use in your environmental scan. And it's commonly used to evaluate different external factors, so external, that can impact your organization. So, it's really about determining trends in these following areas and provide some insight of what may happen based on these trends. So the acronym STEEP does stand for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. Social can be seen as social developments in your environment. Think about consumer behavior, religion, lifestyles, values, technological, focus on advancements in technology, innovation, communication, social media, products we use, economic, consumer buying trends. What are factors like interest rates, international trade? I mean, you can't change the channel without, the news talking about things like the cost of groceries coming up or gas and things like that. Things that affect our economy, environmental, ecosystem, water, wind, food, pollution, regulations, and then political developments, which can highly influence individuals and organizations. So it's important to be aware of likely upcoming shifts in power at municipal, federal, provincial, even at global levels, because political developments can really affect many areas in this. Think about environment, financial markets, the kind of laws introduced. So factors to consider in this space: political stability, tax policies, price regulations, to name a few. So these aren't mutually exclusive. You probably are thinking, this is kind of social, but also technological. That's okay. So really, it's about gaining insight to the past, current, future of the external environment during times of uncertainty, times of information overload, and disorganization. And so just quickly, think about this. If you want to put it in the chat, let us know. What are just some trends that and events in some of these respective areas? What are you seeing socially? Don't think about your organization yet. Just think about immediate trends that come up in this place. So feel free to put that in the chat, direct message me or Phil there. What are some trends that you see with respect to some of these areas? You got some of the things: rising costs of living. So, like economically, I mean, that's also a social trend. It's something we talk about. The ability to work from home has even, I mean, you can look at that as changing socially, economic, like being able to work from home was perhaps something unheard of at some point. Yeah, health, income. I mean, we've probably seen information around like our healthcare, the needs in our healthcare, things that definitely affect us. Pardon me. Supporting equitable access through technology, affecting services and basic needs. Yeah, technology has a piece in a lot of these areas. Aging population, grant availability. Even into the technology space, there's a reluctance to work with people who don't embrace technology, right? Like, and that often is a challenge in many spaces. My mother-in-law is a teacher in Ontario, and when everything moved online, for many students, it was like, oh yeah, I'll just get on my computer. But for many students, they didn't even have a laptop or access to that. So thinking about how these things can affect there. Yeah, changes in government provincially, people are saying demographic changes, lots of construction resulting in increased density for sure. Now, so you're taking a look at these high level areas. Some of you, I mean, I've already spoken to some of it. What does that mean for your organization? So some of you came up with responses like that. If you're willing to throw that in the chat, what does that mean for your organization? What does the rise cost of living mean for your organization? What does working from home, an increase in working from home mean? What does an aging population mean for your organization? So I'll have some folks look at, your organization specifically, what that means, and then put that in the chat. Great. Yeah. Yeah, that it definitely changes the way you like I mean, access to grants obviously is a familiar one for the nonprofit sector. Folks talking about less donations possibly have gone down, or involvement. We talked about how the volunteering sector has even changed. Like, you know, totally, if some people are not comfortable being in spaces with large groups of people, that's going to change the way your volunteer base is going to look like and folks accessing your service. Yeah, there's definitely a reconsideration too of how you offer activities and programs because of things like higher cost of living and so on. Yeah, I mean, the one shared here that I see is around working from home could decrease office space required. Yeah, a lot of organizations are thinking through, do we need, these 3 floors? Do we need this many desks in our space if, we've trusted folks in our organization to work from home? So yeah, many ways that we can look at that. But, I think the point is like, there might be some areas that you might not think affect your organization in one of these spaces, but really some, thinking through them, you can see how there might be some connection on how it can affect what your potential day-to-day looks like and how you strategize around those things. So, we've talked about this a few times, your foundational statements, organization, your vision, mission, and your values. Really, it's important to know a shared understanding here. I'll highlight in this slide this idea of a sweet spot, and how your organization can operate most effectively in that, what we say, a sweet spot. So, you see that the spot is nestled really between your service users, your clients, your community needs, as well as your organization's capabilities. And that is, what are your internal resources, human, financial, whatever it may be. And you notice that it has really nothing to do with what your competitor offers. It's really how you situate yourself, resourcing what best fits needs for the community. So in terms of an overall strategy to think through, nonprofits are concerned with broad decisions about the organization's scope and direction, focusing on the organization as a whole. And they consider what changes should be made for the organization's growth and the strategy for achieving it. So if we want to think through strategic thinking around your foundational statements, we want to think about our greatest value to those who will be accessing potentially our programs or services, whatever it may be. And so let's think of a minute, if you're an organization perhaps that work for youth in a community or work with youth in a community, pardon me, there are many ways to support youth: recreation, education, mental health. Now, what are the areas in which your youth serving organization can be the greatest value? Now, if your community has a large community center, maybe it has a YMCA or something, would it be helpful if you also provided recreation services? I mean, maybe not, but this is where you want to be able to think through your ability to serve best. So perhaps you can ask, are you providing a duplication of services that can be better provided by another organization? So your decisions in this space will come out of where you think your organization can best thrive within your own resources and in the environment that you're serving. Now, goals, I mean, Phil briefly touched upon this here. this often is a challenging part in traditional strategic planning because, goals can come from every which way. Okay, our goals to this, our goals to that. And so, as we shared in that example, when you focus your goal setting rather than, strategy formulations, you get goals that will, while valuable themselves, may not really add to something bigger. So using goal areas might be a better way to focus. In Viking FCSS, we mentioned that they focus on family focus. And again, that can come, that's a very broad area, but at least it's focused on something the organization can speak through. So yeah, what we see in traditional planning is a lot of folks jump to this step right away, but not really having the conversation of like, okay, so what are we actually trying to do? If you figure that you want to be everything to everyone, what happens? You end up really being nobody to everyone because your resources are pulled in many different levels without a focus. So some strategic tips in this area, we again mentioned that scanning piece, do it regularly and check your goals against the relevancy and changes in your environment. You want to think and ask yourselves, have your goals changed as a result of some scanning? They may, and that's okay. And sometimes new perspectives offer new goals. And sometimes you'll need to challenge the status quo, which can be difficult, but it's all part of the process. So in the decision-making piece under your goals, you have to be open to what we're calling as an emergent strategy as new information may come. And again, as Phil mentioned, we're stuffing a lot into a small amount of time. But again, you'll get the recording and we'll actually have a workbook as well that will work through these different areas. So don't fret if you're, trying to frantically type down notes and stuff, you'll get all that information. Now, if you already have goals in an organization, that's okay. Start with the scanning for emerging issues that may affect your organization and your goals. So do scanning regularly, check your goals for relevancy against changes to your environment. Because you want your goals to be realistic, right? And you want them to be feasible given your resourcing, right? Then this is like your human resourcing, your financial, even just your capacity around being able to implement something. Think and have your goals changed as a result of the scan. Oh, I'm a little bit ahead here. And then in your decision, sorry. Phil is messaging me saying I am a little behind. Sorry on the strategies. This is what I want to get to. Sorry, emergent strategies. I just talked about it. It's basically making adjustments as you need to when things around you are changing and the plan you currently have may not be relevant to some degree. So it's taking into account things that maybe you have not originally planned for. And so it's about being able to accommodate to this. And some examples that can the responding to emergent strategy are reprioritizing your work, perhaps to apply for a new grant that's launched that aligns with work you're doing. And so I know many folks said there's been a decrease in grants, but sometimes, hey, a new grant has come up that's relevant to our work. How are we going to shift our resources to be able to do this, right? Perhaps it's reassessing how you operate based on new legislation. We know this happens from time to time and it can create challenges for your organization. So do you have the capacity to be able to shift priorities, shift resources in that? Does your strategy give you room to be able to do that? And so this step helps us see the changes, detours, and path switching. It's normal. And especially in today's complex environments, again, we think about the past few years and reflect on whether strategic plans were nimble enough to anticipate challenges and opportunities. One that was mentioned in the chat a lot was even this online space, right? Where maybe your organization did a lot of things, face to face, and then you were forced to do things online. Did you have the infrastructure, the capability to do some of those things? Now, the most basic idea of strategy is the application of strength against weakness, or perhaps a strength applied to the most promising opportunity. Really, a good strategy just doesn't draw on strengths. It creates strengths through the coherence of its design. And a coherent strategy is one that coordinates policies and actions. And we say this is important because research into organizational development really shows that most organizations of any size don't do this. They pursue multiple objectives that are unconnected with one another, or worse, may conflict with another. And so again, back to our Viking Beaver FCSS example, they identified a family focus in their strategic plan. All the goals, strategies, actions, policies in the organization shifted and applied to that family focus. as a coherent strategy for their goals and so on. So a couple of tips here. I think something that maybe what's the most important here is really establish a criteria to screen your strategies, because you're going to have many ideas, and that's totally okay, very normal, and you want that. But what is the framework you're going to use to actually say yay or nay to this? So I showed you in that example a few slides ago. They came up with questions, right? What's easy? What's difficult? What's something our members will say, oh, this is great? What's something they won't want? What's something for us as an organization to say, no, we are not doing that in a million years? So define some sort of criteria so that everyone's on the same page and asking questions around this is yes, this is no, based on a criteria that we've set up. And then moving into our action plan piece, really, this is the place where some of those detailed tasks and steps, the feasibility of it, will be outlined. And so I mentioned that second point. I'll go back to the first one. Desirability here. Does your plan focus on those you serve, provide service to, or support? In the end of your organization's purpose usually is supporting a greater community or area. Is it feasible? Is it actually possible to do? Given our resources, our time, our human resources, and so on. And then the acceptability of the plan. Is this something that everyone can get behind? Is this something that you can easily defend as well? And so this is just an example of what your action plan could look like here. The goals and strategies are in that first column. The next few answer some of the tangible actions. What is the action itself? Who is doing it? We talked about this earlier around accountability. Maybe it's the by whom can be an individual or committee. It doesn't mean that they actually have to do that work, but it may mean they're ultimately accountable to that work. Sometimes this is helpful, some sort of time component by when some resources that you are committed to it, whether it's financial, whether it's time. This is, again, an example of a fictitious organization. You might want to go into much more detail. Maybe you have something in plan already, but again, when we send out the workbook, they'll have a sample template that, you can test and try with your organization if that's something that's helpful. So in our strategic thinking in this place, after your action plan is created, you want to continually scan the environment. Things change, as we mentioned, all the times. Sometimes you won't even know how feasible the plan is until you start doing it, until you're like, hey, this is working out, or, oh, there's some roadblocks in this step. So be open to potential emergent strategies. Think through the options that address your goals, and then you want to decide which options to pursue based on your scanning of resources and your ability to do that. So again, we know that this section was super fast. Hopefully you can slow down the recording, maybe look at some of the slides a little bit more in detail if that's helpful to you. But before I pass it on to Phil, I just want to say that, many times we hear, hey, we don't have time for that. And to that, really, we think about what is the most important in the moment for your organization. So if you want to create a plan that is potentially future thinking, sustainable, made to alleviate the challenges today, you will need to prioritize that work. Maybe you can't commit a 3-day retreat somewhere, but perhaps you can inject some time at your staff meetings and your board meetings to talk about the future of the organization, what you're seeing in the environment, and ways you can make things better for your organization. I mean, for us internally as an organization, we often talk about, hey, what are things happening around us, and how does that potentially affect the work we're doing? As easy as that at a meeting. Now, we also want to acknowledge that this approach may not be for everyone, and by no means are we trying to prescribe how you do a strategic plan. We're really offering you a point of view, a different point of view. And if you have a method that works for you, it's been working well, by all means, do what works for your organization. And we want to talk about having a good look at your own resources and how to effectively use them immediately. Think about the investment of time involved. And from this practical sense, think about the investment of time you spend on your own resources, your time, your finances. It's not often a hasty decision. It's something that has a thought process that needs to go through that. And as an organization, it's good to have a self-reflection and ask, like, where do we want to position ourselves best? And that often takes time to do. Now I'm going to pass it on to Phil, and he's going to talk about the plan itself and keeping it alive.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Justin. So I want to recognize that we don't have a lot of time left and we want to make room for questions. So I'm going to go through this next piece and then we can move into our question and answer section if there are any. So, and yeah, this next section is on keeping your strategic plan useful and relevant, and we'll send you some more resources when this recording is up. As you can see on this particular slide, as it highlights, plans really tend to collect dust because organizations tend to stop really at these first two steps that you see here, or even the first step, preparing to plan. And we get it. The work is similar to building a boat while it's already sailing. There seems to be a lot of competing priorities at the same time, and there really isn't time to commit to one specific process. But we do say it is important to allocate your time to such a vital part of your organization's health. I also want to focus on the second part, developing content for your strategic plan. I want to stress the importance of having an inclusive approach to developing the plan. So engage your staff and volunteers in the process and hear from your stakeholders about your organization's work and how it affects them. Justin gave some great ideas on how to engage those stakeholders that use, or those service users that use your organization services. Plans will really have built-in buy-in if people feel they are a part of the development of it. And the other points on this slide speak to more the processes that we discussed today, how we write the plan to how we evaluate and celebrate the results. I do want to note other limitations as well. This really echoes the previous slide. We understand that there are limitations and competing priorities, not only within an organization, but we know that life plays a role as well. You are volunteer board members after all. It does take a lot of resources, both time and human, to create and implement a really good and meaningful plan. And with all the planning for the future, it really is still just a vision. There really is no guarantee that even if your plan is followed in its entirety, that you will achieve your anticipated results. There is also an acknowledgement that there may be many traditional systems in place that tend to be barriers to more future thinking type work. Let's even look at the most common nonprofit legislation in Alberta, the Societies Act. And this is an act that more or less has remained the same since the early 1900s when it was first introduced. And of course, the best laid plans could be derailed easily by large scale events like a global pandemic, for instance. I also, one last thing I want to note is just a quote that I heard in a presentation from another individual, one of our good friends, Felicie Lettner. This quote is not attributed to her. I believe she is quoting it from somebody else, and I've lost the attribution. But the quote is, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So you may have a great strategic plan. It is beautifully bound. It has all that strategic thinking put into it. But if your organization does not have the culture in place to support the implementation of that plan and to keep it going, you're not going to see many gains in that strategic plan. So it's really best to also nurture that environment within your organization that really promotes the use of that strategic plan and using it in your decision making. So some tips to keep your plan alive. So first thing, adopt the plan formally. Send out an official email to all of your staff, your volunteers, to say that we are adopting this strategic plan. Let them know what is in the strategic plan so that they know the direction that your organization is going. You can use the language from the plan in all business of the organization. And that way, everyone in your organization will know what you're doing, what you set out to do, and that there is a method to your madness. Link your goals as much as possible. So for instance, maybe you are holding an event that and you can communicate to the attendees how that particular event is helping you achieve goal number 10 in your strategic plan, for instance. So I mentioned that you can link your report directly to the plan as well when staff or committees are reporting progress to the board. Use a format that follows the goals and strategies in the plan and speaks to the indicators or performance measures to help understand how well you're doing at reaching those goals. You know what? Justin and I will keep banging this drum forever. Creating the plan together builds a sense of ownership over that plan. So again, when the group works through the planning process together, they are part of the development and review processes. They're more likely to use that plan and move it forward. Finally, monitor and evaluate. Build in regular plan reflections, plan reviews, and plan developments. So we want to make those three things distinct. So a reflection is going to happen more frequently, where you just touch base with the plan and check in to make sure everything is still on track. Perhaps it's monthly, you may do some tweaking to the plan, but no major overhauls. Then you can do a review, which happens less often, but still regularly. And the timing will depend on your specific organization, perhaps once a year. You're going to take a look at the plan more thoroughly, review it a little bit more thoroughly, and again, make more tweaks and adjustments if needed. Finally, a plan development happens even less frequently, perhaps every 3 years. Again, that's dependent on the group. And this is a full plan development starting from step 1. The vision may stay the same because it's supposed to be very long-term, but your mission might change depending on any changes in business. But everything else should be rethought and taken through the scrutiny of all the pre-planning exercises that we talked about earlier. Here are some more practical tips. You can just ask at a meeting, how does this action or motion we are discussing align with the goals of our plan? And that way you can really embed that discussion in your meetings about and tying it back to your strategic plan. You could have the plan goals as standing items at regular meetings with an assigned member to speak to the developments in that goal since you last met. And you can designate time at quarterly meetings to discuss a priority goal area. Perhaps you're focusing on one goal area in one quarter, and in the next area, or in the next quarter, you're focusing on another. So you can ask questions like, where are we at with this? What changes have happened or need to happen, of course. This is just a reflection exercise. Again, there's not much time, so you don't necessarily need to write this into the chat box, but I want you to reflect on what is one takeaway that you could use or explore further when you go back to your organization. So that's just something that you might want to take a look at and think about, what can we take back, or what can I take back and have discussions with my organization. I want to leave off with a high-level summary of today because we have offered a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So we discussed the importance of environmental scanning. We want to say include scanning, thinking, and decision-making in each element of your plan. Ensure your goals are strategic, and that means that they have significant influence on the scope and commitment of your organization. Measure progress and evaluate your strategies, or evaluate your plan and embrace emergent strategies. I do want to note that I have said, I've placed an importance on monitoring and evaluating your plan, and that is a piece that we did not speak about today, however, but it's incredibly important. Evaluation, Justin and I could speak about evaluation for another hour and a half, so that's why we did not include it in this particular presentation today, but it is really important. What I would say in regards to evaluation is really success is dependent on your group because goals and objectives are different for each group. So I would encourage you, when you're thinking about evaluation, what are you really wanting to know about from that evaluation? Are you looking for satisfaction levels? Sure, that's great. But how does that help you move forward in your organization? What does satisfaction levels tell you what you can do better or what you can work on? So that's what I'll leave you with in regards to evaluation. I'm seeing some comments about absolutely, yes, evaluation is important. It can be a tough thing to wrap your head around. I have a question. Can we hire our organization to facilitate a strategic retreat? Justin is going to have some more information on that with you from you a little bit earlier. Here are some other resources that we have for you here. Just a look at strategic planning versus business planning because they are different. Some other links are in there for you. This will be available in the slide deck that we give to you in a couple of days when we return back to work on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. With that, I think we can move on to questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we will take as many as we can within the time that we are allowed today. Justin, do you have anything to add at this point while people are thinking of questions?
Yeah, I will. I know you just mentioned it, Phil, but yeah, so the community development unit can provide support around coaching and consulting around strategic planning for the organization. We'll just get the numbers and contact info here and put them in the chat so everyone can see them here. You can apply for facilitation assistance with strategic planning, but you will be screened through a process around readiness and this and that. So just because you want it doesn't mean like automatically, oh yeah, we'll work with you. Because we do have questions as well around, hey, if we do support you in planning, is this something that will move forward, or is this something that one really passionate board member wants to do? So you will be screened a little bit for those kind of things, but to answer the questions here and there, hey, like I talked about those tools, hey, we would want a tool some more tools on scanning. Can you send us some information? So Phil has just put the number there. We'll also put up the email as well if you want to get in contact with us there. Phil, do you have any questions in your chat there?
Yeah, so I have a question just around the slide deck. So this was the fund development slide deck and resources emailed, or so this was last week's presentation. Was that emailed out?
Yeah, so it was emailed out. If you actually board leadership Calgary .ca has all those laid out with all the resources that Gail has provided for us. I'll post the link there. So you can find everything there, links to the YouTube channel, all that stuff, even from our first session, Board Basics, even from our last 2 years of sessions online, you can find all that information. So I'll put that in the chat as well, and you can find last week's.
Justin, another question. Is there a specific process to adjusting a strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. Phil and I mean, we've said emergent strategies multiple times. I think it's depending on what you have, and it sucks. We will always give this answer. It depends, because we don't know the situation of your organization. But I think if there is a mutual understanding amongst your leadership and boards that things could possibly change and shift, like a very common one, potentially a new funding application comes out, like, is your staffing or board member who usually does that, are they so busy with everything that not one, if something came up, they would have no time for that. So it's being able to, how do we create space for areas where we might need to shift, right? And that might be as easy as having a conversation with your board and saying, things might change. Will we be able to shift our resources if we need to, whether it's our time, our people, and so on? And if we do, like, what would that look like? So yeah, I don't know, Phil, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what we often see as well is if you need to shift, don't be afraid to let something else kind of be put on the back burner. A lot of times, I think when you want to embrace that emergent strategy, like spending time and applying for a new grant that may come out, you also think that you need to continue to do everything that you've been doing before. Have the mindset that some things might be able to be put into abeyance for a little bit, just until you tackle that emergent strategy until that is over, and then continue it. That is going to be there for you.
Thanks. I have a question here around, back to the quote around opinions and thinking. How do you support the latter over the former during a process? I mean, I think a good question that we asked this internally as well, Phil, around like, okay, so this is maybe what you think. What is informing that thinking? Like, give me the evidence that, like, what are you seeing that could lead to this? So if it's like, hey, we need to change our program because like everyone is online, like this and this, and we need to do it. Okay, yeah, I understand that. But what are the indicators that are saying we need to be online? I mean, and for us, it's easy. We get emails that say, hey, can this be offered online? Can I watch this? Is there a recording? So it's not just about opinions per se, but what is the foundation around that opinion and how to do that? And it's not, I know there's some people who don't want to deal with conflict, but I think it's okay to say, hey, what is informing that opinion? Like, what is it? Did you see something on the news? Did you see this? I don't know, Phil, do you have any more thoughts on that? Because I know we get this a lot from our team too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we mentioned this earlier, really this whole process is about being proactive in your strategy and not reactive. So, you got one email that said, hey, you really should be online. Okay, well, and you're going to switch your entire plan to do that. Well, maybe that might not be. Perhaps you've gotten like 50% of your service users saying, hey, I can't attend this, or could you please provide online? Maybe then that's something that you want to take a look at. So think about what, again, Justin mentioned this, feasibility. Is it feasible? Is it desirable? And of course, is it within the realm of possibility within your organization's resources as well?
For sure. Yeah.
Following along with that, I have this question, Justin. How can you manage groupthink in strategic planning? People agreeing so they don't have to do the work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing. You know, there's a lot of process that we use in facilitation around being able to, you know, pull folks information out. You know, a lot of it is just like self-reflection, pairing, sharing. Like, what are folks need to understand that if you are asked to be a part of this board, you're going to be accountable to those decisions, whether you agree on them or not. Because, you know, as a board, we talk about this in our board development, one voice moving forward. So, you know, even selling that, this is a big deal. This isn't just, okay, everyone else do the work, but also being able to get people's feedback, not just through group discussions. You know, there might be some, you know, it might be some self-reflection. Hey, everyone, write down on paper, on sticky notes, what are 3 things we should focus on? And then maybe talk about it with someone beside you, then talk about it as a group. Then you're not getting, you know, overpowering voices, as we know that tends to happen as well. Any more thoughts there? I know we're 1 minute over, Phil, but if I missed
Yeah.
any.
No other thoughts there. I think that's great. I want to recognize that we do have other questions, and probably we can't get them today. Please feel free to reach out to us either at Board Leadership Calgary, the Board Leadership Calgary email address, or contacting our community development unit at communitydevelopment@gov.ab.ca. You know what? You may not get Justin or I, but you're going to get one of our great colleagues within the community development unit who can help you as well. Justin, I think I'll hand it over to you to round off the rest of today's presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you again for everyone for, you know, if you've been here the past 3 weeks, thank you. If this is your first time with Board Leadership Calgary, thank you as well. I just put the evaluation link in the chat box, so please take a couple of minutes to do it. You know, if you do have to run, you will get the email that's probably sent already around this link there. But again, thank you for continuing to support this. I know it's been a little bit different than it has been the next few years. Who knows what will next year will look like, but you know, we're hopeful that we can continue to provide some really high quality information to you folks there. So again, please, I know maybe your question wasn't answered, please send us an email either through the Board Leadership Calgary at gmail.com or that community development link that's in your chat. So quickly save it right now, because we're going to end this meeting in like a few seconds here. So again, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.